We've all been there at one point. Driving, walking, or cycling along your way, probably right on the razor's edge of being where you need to be on time, and you approach a railroad crossing. And as you do, you see the red lights start flashing, and as the gates drop, you curse under your breath as you come to a stop and wait for a train to pass. If it's a passenger train crossing your path, it could be an annoyance that would last about a minute or so, but still makes you feel bitter that you were held up. It's definitely a lot worse if it's a mile-long freight train that would take over 5 minutes to clear. But whether the train is 2 cars or 200, it's still an annoyance that you wish you could jump through. Now, of course, if you are a sensible person, you would know that trying such a thing is extremely ill-advised and can lead to your untimely demise. And you've probably seen either news stories about people getting struck by trains at these crossings, or even seen footage of such incidents. And seeing something so terrifying and often fatal, you wonder why anyone would be dumb enough to try it in the first place. Oftentimes, the discussion about such incidents boils down to the foolishness of the driver involved. After all, the train is never able to stop in time. The laws of physics simply do not allow it to do so unless it's somehow presented with incredibly advanced warning, and such a warning is hard to get into the cab of an oncoming train. Unfortunately, as terrifying as it is, over 300 people are killed every year in the US in incidents involving railroad crossings. That's close to a death every day. And despite the efforts of programs such as Operation Lifesaver and better technology for railroad crossings, the number of deaths associated with railroad crossings is sadly climbing in the US. Not at all helped by the notoriety of incidents involving the higher speed passenger rail operator Brightline in Florida, leading to Brightline receiving an unfortunate nickname of the Train of Death in some cases. So it leads to an obvious question: what can we do to effectively eliminate these incidents? Well, there is an answer. It's one that not only makes our roads and railroads safer and less annoying for all, but it makes them more reliable and can make both road traffic and the trains faster as well. However, how we get to such a solution does lead us to several questions that may lead to some questioning if it's worth doing, even if reality says that ultimately it is. Remember to stop, look, and listen. Let's describe what that answer is. Firstly, the obvious question with an obvious answer needs to be said. What is a railroad crossing? Or grade crossing, level crossing, whatever you want to call it. Simply put, a railroad crossing is essentially an intersection where a road meets a railroad. In such a case, in not just every state in the US, but literally everywhere in the world, the intersection will always give the train priority. And every driver, cyclist, or pedestrian must stop and wait for the train to pass before proceeding. Now, the reason why that is the case is pretty simple. The train cannot stop. Like, literally, it physically cannot stop. A train traveling at, let's say, 80 miles an hour would take anywhere between 600 feet to stop if it's a lighter weight passenger train, and well over 2 miles to stop if it's a freight train. And that's with the engineer slamming on the emergency brakes with perfect reaction time and under ideal circumstances. And the reason for that is also disgustingly simple. Trains are heavy. Like, really heavy. One of these electric rail cars shown here on this SEPTA train, for instance, a vehicle that is fairly lightweight by railroad standards, weighs 73 tons empty, and as a 5-car train is 365 tons, at minimum. On the other end of the spectrum, freight trains could weigh well over 10,000 tons on average, the literal weight of a large building, with some weighing up to twice that much. Couple that with the fact that trains run with steel wheels on steel rails and therefore have minimal rolling resistance only adds to this point, even though the steel on steel makeup makes trains the most energy efficient form of land transportation ever devised. Not even maglev can beat it. So yeah, when a railroad interacts with a road, the train will always get priority. It's one of those things that people tacitly understand the reason behind once one truly sees the scope of the machines crossing their path. However, for such a crossing, as with an intersection between two roads, some form of signaling would be needed. For a regular road, this ranges from a stop sign to a traffic light, and the same goes for railroad crossings too. For more rural and lesser used lines, pretty much all the impetus is put on the driver, with the crossing just featuring the iconic X-shaped crossing sign known as a crossbuck. As the old saying goes, when you get to the crossbuck, you need to stop, look, and listen. If you see the train coming or hear its horn, or whistle in ye olden days of steam engines, you stay where you are and wait for it to pass, particularly since trains can actually be rather hard to judge the speed of. And on the other side of the interaction, the train's engineer, or driver if you're not from North America, is required to blow the horn approaching the crossing. And if you're in the US and you've ever frequently heard train horns be blown, you might notice that they do so with the same pattern, which is 2 long blasts, followed by a short blast, and then another long blast as the train goes over the crossing itself. This pattern is used to provide the greatest degree of warning to drivers and pedestrians near the crossing. And if the train is going faster than 60 miles an hour, usually they'll start blowing the horn about a quarter of a mile from the crossing itself. And yes, this is by law that they do this. The Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, is pretty clear cut on this point. Although there is an exception to this that I'll discuss later on in the video. Now, I just described the bare bones version of an interaction at a crossing. The majority of the time though, you'd likely come across a crossing that looks like this. The main difference here is that the crossbuck is fitted with flashing red lights, bells, and usually 2 but sometimes 4 crossing gates to block the road. And if you're lucky and in a place that actually cares a lick about pedestrians, you may even get these tiny little gates to block the sidewalk. And in some countries on certain routes, the gates will also have a bar at the bottom to act as a more thorough barrier. Sadly, this is very rare if not non-existent in the US. Now, everything I described here is all well and good, and it does help at least a little. But there is an old saying that I think very much pertains to the reason why railroad crossing accidents still happen, even with very visible and audible alerts to prevent such incidents. And that saying goes, you cannot make anything foolproof because fools are so ingenious. This very much pertains to really a lot of accidents on the road, but railroad crossings are one of the most spectacular examples of this. In a complex environment, especially one where a railroad line is not the only thing to be concerned of, but also an intersection with a road as well, it's very easy for people to lose their situational awareness and misjudge a situation. This is sadly the case at a lot of crossings, particularly those which involve a railroad crossing and a road intersection, and worse still, if there is little to no synchronization between the traffic lights and the railroad crossing alarms. This has been found to be a key cause of several grade crossing accidents, but few of them stand out in my mind more than the infamous Fox River Grove incident in Illinois on October 25, 1995, when the driver of a school bus was caught between a red light and an intersection and the railroad tracks behind her, and the rear of the bus was left hanging over the tracks right into the path of an oncoming Metra commuter train traveling at over 60 miles an hour. Even the train hitting the emergency brakes would be nowhere near enough, and 7 children aboard the bus were killed as the bus's body was ripped off the chassis by the force of the impact and thrown to the side. And then of course, there's the cases of just sheer impatience. There have been many a case of drivers and pedestrians running right through the crossing as the gates are coming down, or just straight up going around the gates to cross, as oftentimes the gates only cover the lanes on the side of the road that people are supposed to be on, not the whole road. Sometimes they succeed and they're emboldened to try again, and others are nowhere near as fortunate, and it can often be fatal. It kind of goes to show another old saying that I think pertains when you're being real about a certain situation. If it's stupid but it works, it's still stupid. You just got away with it. Both of these are key reasons as to why that number remains around 300 deaths per year in incidents at railroad crossings in the US, and why sadly that number is trickling up. So it begs the question, what more can be done? Well, thankfully, there is one ultimate endgame solution. It may seem crazy to some, but it is both the best option and feasible in more places than you may think when I say it. So, what is it? Easy. Get rid of the crossing altogether and build a bridge or a tunnel over the crossing, or to use the technical term for such a move, build a grade separation. And not only is grade separation a massive improvement in terms of safety, it's also a massive improvement in terms of traffic management for the roads, and especially a massive improvement to the speed and reliability of train services. Grade separation is nothing new, and in fact, it's one of the key reasons why highways can run at higher speed limits and higher average speeds than conventional roads can. Well, at least in theory anyway. Take this grade separation for instance. The road we're next to here is Pennsylvania Route 100, and the road going over Route 100 is US Highway 30 in Exton, Pennsylvania. Traffic on Route 30 is able to run at higher speeds over Route 100 and treat it like it wasn't even there in the first place. In fact, the only way you would know that Route 100 was there in the first place was from the traffic signs overhead and the on and off ramps that lead drivers on and off of Route 30 from Route 100. And that same principle applies to railroads. In fact, if I turn the camera around in this exact location, we see exactly that. The road is Route 100 again, but on that bridge overhead is the Amtrak Keystone Corridor, a major rail corridor running between Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh, and one where trains routinely run at over 100 miles per hour and will run even faster in the coming years with track upgrades. And one of the key things that makes those higher speeds both physically attainable and also allows the trains to run at those high speeds safely, comfortably, and much more reliably is because of grade separation. The entire Keystone Corridor from Philly to Harrisburg is grade separated. And it's a key reason why the Amtrak Keystone Corridor has one of the best on-time performances of any service on Amtrak's network. And if you want an even greater example of grade separation in action, have a look at the fastest and best railroad line in the country right now, the Northeast Corridor. This major rail corridor connects Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, New Haven, Providence, and Boston, and everything in between, with the majority of Amtrak trains on the line cruising for long parts of the journey at 125 miles an hour, and the high-speed Acela service can reach 150 and soon 160 miles an hour in parts of the route. Over the entire 457 miles from Washington to Boston, the overwhelming majority of the line is grade separated, with the only exceptions being 11 grade crossings, all not just in one state, but in one county, namely New London County, Connecticut, which happens to be one of the slowest parts of the Northeast Corridor. Now, that slow speed is for multiple reasons, particularly the winding nature of that part of the line on the Connecticut coast. But the grade crossings don't really help the case, since having any grade crossings on a part of the route puts a hard legal limit to the speed limit of the route to 110 miles an hour, which isn't really attainable there anyway due to infrastructure reasons. As such, if the route is to see improvements, the obvious thing would be to build grade separations, particularly since the roads that the line crosses link to relatively isolated coastal communities for which the roads are a lifeline. And this would be an improvement to their connectivity as much as it would be an improvement to the rail line itself. Elsewhere along the corridor, for example here in Ridley Park, Pennsylvania, the line breezes over roads like here over Chester Pike or US Route 13 like it wasn't even there. And that leads me in turn to another benefit of grade separation: noise, or lack thereof. I'm sure you noticed when I demonstrated the horn patterns that train engineers use when going over crossings that train horns are loud. Very loud. They also blow their horns for quite a lengthy amount of time, and this naturally leads to noise complaints, especially when there is a regular train service running. I'll name you a little local example to me. I live in a town along SEPTA's Media Wawa line, a regional rail line running out from Philadelphia to a park and ride station called Wawa in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. The line actually used to run to the much more substantial town of Westchester until the 1980s, a topic I made a video about in fact. Anyways, on the approach to Wawa Station, the line goes over a grade crossing over Lenny Road, going to the community of the same name, which used to have a station on the line until the 80s, the site of which is now a crew base for the nearby Lenny Yard. And it's both the crossing and the yard that have been a big cause for noise complaints. Ever since the line was re-extended from Elwyn to Wawa in 2022, noise complaints swiftly followed, both for the blowing of horns going over the Lenny Road crossing, but also for the blowing of horns in the middle of the night in Lenny Yard from maintenance crews testing the horns on the trains before they set off for the day. Now, there were a fair number of people who said that they should just get over it, but as someone who lives in a place where one can hear horns on a regular basis, it just becomes white noise to me after a while, but I'm definitely more used to it than they are. And I'm definitely not as close to the horns as they are myself either. And what really doesn't help the case here is that since the tracks run along the side of a valley, the horns tend to echo really easily. Lenny is definitely not alone either, and there are numerous places where horn complaints are routinely made to local governments demanding action. And there is actually a method in place for them to do so, and what that is petitioning the Federal Railroad Administration to designate that crossing or general area as a quiet zone, where engineers will not blow their horns when going over crossings. In the case of Lenny, this hasn't been instituted just yet, but SEPTA did work out a deal with the township that their crews will not blow their horns in Lenny Yard at all, and when going over the Lenny Road crossing, the engineers won't blow their horns at full power, lowering the sound produced to make it more tolerable. But even then, while the situation is better than it was before, it still treats a symptom rather than the overall issue, which is the crossing itself, the safety issues present, and the stunting of efficiency along with the noise issues. And to get an idea of what such a great separation may look like for those disbelieving of it, you only need to look a few hundred yards away at the bridge that the line goes on over Lundgren Road, where the only real concern could be the height of the bridge for trucks. And in this case, your average truck that serves the nearby industrial complex tends to fit under the bridge just fine. Granted, there aren't too many 18-wheelers that come around here, the roads are just way too windy for them. Now, you may understandably wonder if creating grade separations is even possible in a lot of situations. And from a technical standpoint, that answer seems to be yes. In fact, it's something railroads did with some regularity a long time ago. You know, back when the railroads still cared about creating and maintaining good infrastructure for good service. A rant for another time, perhaps. While on mainline railroads, such grade separation projects are extremely rare and only done on lines where traffic warrants it, with famous examples of such projects being the Alameda Corridor in Los Angeles, as well as the train box through Reno, Nevada, both of which removes the much more disruptive previous idea of running long freight trains and, in Reno's case, passenger trains as well along busy city streets. The realm where you would usually see grade separations in the modern day, though, would be in the realm of public transportation agencies, and oftentimes agencies are building grade separations for new transit projects to eliminate these conflicts before it's even a problem in the first place. YouTuber Nandert has an amazing channel covering transit projects in Los Angeles, and you'll often hear of a lot of grade separation projects that the LA Metro is building for their ever-expanding light rail network, as well as the general annoyances that are part and parcel of building transit for a city that desperately needs it like LA, but is full of some of the most infamous NIMBYism cases in the world. Staying in LA though, their commuter rail operator Metrolink, in a bid to be less mediocre than it is now, sorry not sorry, is also embarking on grade separation projects to improve speeds and frequencies on their main corridors out of LA Union Station, while also serving as an early prep project for California high-speed rail in the future. And for the grand and amazing ideas out there, definitely check out the Rio Grande Plan in Salt Lake City, which is a proposal to dig a train box under the city to reconnect the UTA's frontrunner commuter rail service to the city's famous Rio Grande Depot for it to serve as a proper transport hub for the city once more and free up space from the disused rail yards for future development, among a lot of other benefits. If you're interested in this one, definitely check out the channel of Christian Leonard, one of the guys who proposed the project and naturally one of his leaders. Definitely check out his stuff. His engineering background really helps present how feasible and beneficial it is, all while being delightfully nerdy at the same time. But looking at something a bit closer to me in the Philadelphia area, I need not look much further than SEPTA's Reimagining Regional Rail Plan, their overall vision for what they want to do for Philadelphia's regional rail services. Now, I definitely have some criticisms with it, but the overall desire that they have to improve services in the long term and make the system live up to its full potential at long last is very admirable, because SEPTA could easily boast one of, if not the best regional rail network on the continent if they had the means to make it possible. But my lament aside, one of the areas that SEPTA cites as concerns that stunt their current potential is the grade crossings on the network. Now, to their credit, or more likely the credit of the railroads that SEPTA took over commuter services from, the Pennsylvania and Reading railroads, 7 of the 13 lines that run are fully grade separated, with the lines still having crossings to deal with being the Lansdale-Doylestown line, the West Trenton line, the Warminster line, the Fox Chase line, although that one only has 1 grade crossing left, the Media-Wawa line, and the Manayunk-Norristown line, and the latter of which has a particularly crazy case of its own right up around Conshohocken, where the line goes over no less than 6 crossings in just over a mile between Spring Mill and Conshohocken stations, meaning the engineer is pretty much constantly on the horn. Yes, I counted, and even as an avid train buff by my own admission, I do wonder how the people in Conchi deal with it. Well, then again, given the traffic that area is infamous for, the horn noise is probably drowned out by the road noise anyway. So, for the lines that do have grade crossings, a lot of challenges lay ahead for any prospective project, the least of which being moving the section of the line onto a new bridge or underpass depending on the situation, with one of the biggest cost concerns being ones where entire stations would have to be rebuilt from scratch for the grade separation to work effectively. And a pretty typical configuration of such a thing can be found here at Seacane Station on the SEPTA Media-Wawa line, where not only is there a crossing right next to the station where the line crosses Providence Road, but just past the station going towards Philly, there's another crossing a few hundred feet after the station where the line crosses South Bishop Avenue, which serves as a connection to a couple of housing developments. Building a line that would eliminate crossings here would more likely than not involve one of these two options: completely elevating the track on embankment over both Providence and South Bishop, and likely keeping the embankment all the way to the next station at Primos just down the line, or forcing Providence and South Bishop to be dug under the line, or even one of the roads to be completely cut off from each other and forcing drivers to go other way to get where they want to go. Now, there is a lot of ramifications from just that idea, and given how disruptive such a project would be, potentially leading to the destruction of several homes along the line to make way for the embankment at worst, or severing the connection at best, there is likely to be quite vocal opposition to this idea unless something can be done that can circumvent the concern. So I'm under no illusion that there are likely to be losers in some of these situations. Multiply these concerns across the network and it becomes evident that this kind of project takes quite a bit longer to bear all of its fruit than most infrastructure projects do. And that's not even considering the fact that both Primos and Seacane stations were completely rebuilt recently, and the elevated options would see them demolished and rebuilt again, which would seem like a waste, along with all the disruptions such a project would cause. This is why grade separation projects on existing rail lines tend to be very much long-term projects. The example I think that could serve as a template for a future project in Philadelphia and other American cities lies all the way across the Pacific in Melbourne, Australia. In 2015, the Victorian state government launched the Level Crossing Removal Project, very creative name, I know, which set out to remove 110 grade crossings and rebuild 51 stations on Melbourne's suburban rail network, which as of the end of 2023 has seen 74 of the crossings removed and 39 stations rebuilt over the 8-year lifespan of the project. While the project has thus far been regarded as a major success for the rail network and even for the Victorian state government as a whole, it may seem to some like 75% completion 8 years on is ungodly slow for something so crucial. Well, that's sadly kind of the nature of the beast. Not only because it's an infrastructure project, but because it's an infrastructure project that's supposed to be the very last word on a long-standing issue. You have got to get this right, and you've got to take a lot of things into consideration too. Even then, there's naturally local backlash to these kinds of construction projects simply because it's a disruptive project. But the thing that can so often happen with projects such as these is that once the infrastructure is up and running and the construction equipment is gone, people don't care. They only see the improvement to their local environment after a little bit, and the improvement to their mobility, and that, whether consciously or not, they were kind of silly to complain about it in a lot of cases. And in Melbourne's case in particular, they've done a pretty good job of giving the rebuilt stations better facilities and an identity with their surroundings. Heck, some of them even have the old station buildings built into the new ones. Long story short, just like the Reimagining Regional Rail project itself, grade crossing removal is one of those gradual things that requires a concerted effort to make the general area better for the people who live around the line and the roads that pass near it. Grade separation may sound like a specific transportation topic, but its benefits extend well beyond just the efficiency and safety of the transport network. It can even help stitch communities back together, and along the Northeast Corridor, there's a prime place to do just that. The Northeast Corridor, as previously mentioned, is a grade-separated rail line all the way from Washington to New York City and as far as New London, Connecticut before it deals with its first crossing. At least, its first official crossing. As the line approaches Philadelphia from the south, the line passes through the southern suburbs of the city, starting just over the Delaware state line at Marcus Hook, through Chester, and all the way up to Derby before reaching the city. And if you spend a degree of time around the line, whether it be to catch a train or to film trains or both, you may notice the odd figure or two crossing over the tracks, even climbing over the separation fences at stations. These are residents of the neighborhoods that surround the line, doing this as a way to get where they need to go. Not only is this trespassing on railroad property and very unsafe, but in its own way, it points towards an opportunity. And that's because the reason why people cross the tracks is because proper pedestrian crossings are ridiculously far away from where the people are, as they tend to only carry major streets and roads. In a lot of ways, the tracks create an east-west divide between neighborhoods, and people who live only a few hundred feet away as the crow flies are a half-hour walk or greater when using proper roads and sidewalks. It's kind of a similar phenomenon to what building a freeway through a neighborhood is capable of doing, though it's likely in a lot of cases that the rail line came first before a lot of the developments did around here. But regardless of what came first though, building pedestrian or road overpasses and trails connecting neighborhoods across the tracks from each other can be a method of healing as well as a safety improvement. And in places like here around Sharon Hill, the trench nature of the tracks can make prospective bridges over the line easier to build. I see little sensible reason, aside from financial constraints or a lack of ideas, why an effort to bridge these gaps in the most literal sense isn't being considered, since it makes the neighborhood safer and more accessible for its residents, thus providing them with better access to resources and opportunities. And especially given the underprivileged nature of a lot of the neighborhoods in the region, particularly in and around Chester, this could be one piece in giving the people around here better chances to improve their communities. They already have access to a very effective mass transit line, but they don't have access to each other. This is the sort of thing that a grade separation can do for a community. It can open up gateways to the people around us and make our places safer and more like a true community. As of the making of this video, there are over 200,000 railroad crossings in the United States. And while a lot of people may see them as a simple fact of life and one of the annoyances of getting around, they are ones with deeper consequences than what many may think at first glance, from safety concerns to noise complaints to acting as a barrier between certain places. However, there are many cases where that doesn't have to be so. And as rail transport of both passengers and freight becomes recognized as a true keystone piece to our future transportation needs going forward, the prospect of removing crossings to improve reliability and safety of both roads and rails alike becomes more appealing, paired with the fact that the separation that major arteries like highways and rail lines can make for communities can be a counter to the economic and connection benefit that the rail lines give, to the point that it's the literal reason why the phrase "wrong side of the tracks" exists in the first place. A grade separation can be more than mere slabs of concrete and excavation, because if done right, as shown around the world, it can create a connection to the world and a community icon all rolled into one, more so than any freeway overpass could even fathom. The rails in this country have tremendous potential, unlike anywhere else in the world, and projects like this can be one of the things that turn potential to an amazing reality, even for people who don't think to take the train to get where they need to go. Now, I am under no illusion that this will happen everywhere, and in the places that it very much will take time to accomplish. But the end result is worth it for the transportation network and the people around it that it will serve. As such, I encourage you to look around where you live, wherever you may be, and see if you can find a railroad crossing. It may take some imagination, but imagine if the road and rails were not forced to interact, and instead of backed up traffic, you can see a thorough connection between two places, and maybe even a station on the train line that can take you to places beyond what you can see. It may sound imaginative and unrealistic, but that's the thing, it isn't in a lot of cases. Places around the world often look quite different than they had before because of them. And while in a lot of cases that sort of phrase is seen in a negative context, you can definitely find that in a positive way with grade separation projects. And if you live near a rail line, see if you can find any mutterings about possible separation projects, or even just complaints about how the trains cause traffic issues. Because in those mutterings could lie an opportunity for your community. One that, while banal in its name, could be transformational for the people around you and how they get around.